and explain to you what we've been trying to do. So next slide, please. Um, you know, Charlie talked about checkpoints and blockages on roads. He is correct. We are a little bit disappointed that after close to 8 weeks of lockdown, people are still thinking in terms of checkpoints and roadblocks. You know, we are about to have much more severe problems than that. But I won't repeat what Charlie said. Instead, I'm going to say that checkpoints and roadblocks are meant to prevent people from mixing with each other on the ground. There are no checkpoints or roadblocks in the air, and there is no issue with bringing an airplane into an airport uh, as long as the pilots don't exit the airport area or even the ramp. So I'm going to talk about how a supply chain doesn't have any ceilings because you can go over it. You can go over all the blockages that you have, and therefore you can unblock the supply chain in ways that we have not thought about before. Next slide, please. At first, at first glance, people don't really know what general aviation is. So I'm going to define that a little bit. Um, the best definition, there are lots of definitions, but the best definition I've seen is from the AOPA, the Airline Operators and Pilots Association. They define general aviation as non-airline and non-military. In other words, anything that is not scheduled airline or not military is general aviation. These are aviation's blue-collar pilots. There are no uniforms, there are no stripes on our shoulders, and there are no flight attendants or cabin crew or even catering for us in the airplane. Instead, we fly corporate missions, we fly medvac missions. General aviation pilots fly crop dusting missions, they do aerial photography. All flight training is part of general aviation. Recreational flying, of course, and charter. So, for example, the PLDT helicopter is flown by a general aviation pilot. He is commercial, but he's not flying passengers except for one person, right, or two. Over the past 25 days since April 5, general aviation, or at least those volunteers that we have tried to organize, have flown more than 20 humanitarian flights, carrying over 3.3 metric tons of cargo. Why is this so important? Before I leave this slide, I'm going to point out to you that the airplane you see in the picture, that's a Cessna single engine airplane, all right? That can carry about 150 kilos of cargo if there are two pilots in it. All of the people you see there are general aviation pilots, except for two Coast Guard members who helped us pack the airplane with cargo. This is the sort of airplane that is typically flown. So we go to the next slide, please. At first, I was wondering, what are we doing? What is our mission when we first started this? This was entirely voluntary. We contacted donors and said, we can fly cargo for you. So it started as flights. It went on to become connections, because in the end, even today we're no longer using just airplanes. But I've realized in the past couple of days that we don't really provide just flights or connections. We provide solutions. And I'll give you some examples of that later. So primarily, who are the donors? Well, there's a lot of donations from going through the office of the Vice President of the Philippines. And what strikes me the most is that a lot of donors are doctors who are sharing supplies. The very few and scarce supplies that they have, they realize that there are doctors in the provinces who don't have this, who have no access to PPEs, and therefore they are sharing supplies through us. And then there are a lot of donors also in the private sector who are just concerned about hospitals and clinics in the provinces and want to help. The beneficiaries are primarily provincial hospitals, regional health units, local government units, and even the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines. We've carried some cargo for them. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about what it is exactly that we carry, but let's go on to the next slide. So it's all volunteer. These are airplane owners and operators or pilots who are donating time and fuel for non-revenue cargo. They derive no compensation for this. And basically, we are piggybacking on airplanes that are already flying somewhere or on airplanes that are willing to fly somewhere at no cost to us. Um, Early in the period, actually as early as August 5th, the Philippine Coast Guard already deployed a twin-engine Islander and their brand new Eurocopter 145 helicopter to us, for us. They flew on August 5. They flew a mission for us to Busuanga and Puerto Princesa, and they have been flying for us ever since to multiple destinations. In addition to that, also um, two airlines have fulfilled three flights for us. I have a good story about that later. And then, as recently as the other day, a shipping company has volunteered to help us. They are providing critical solutions for cargo that is already in Cebu and that needs to be moved to several small destinations all over the Visayas and Mindanao. Next, please. um, uh, I've been saying August 5. I don't know why I keep mistaking months for each other. I meant April 5, right? Since April 5 that we started. The core team was formed very early when we realized there was a lot of work to do. So these are, I'm not going to name any names to embarrass them, but these are five pilots who are working entirely at home. Well, except for one who is posted at the airport to help us load and identify airplanes. But generally, we all work from home. It has all been via Facebook. I have been locked down since March 17. So have the others on the team. And everything is done via WhatsApp Messenger. What do? We match donors to airplanes and destinations. So it is almost like Uber or Grab, if I could use that analogy. Um, we uh, we get we get we get comments or calls from people who want to send something to Katarman or to Masbate. And then we call our friends who are pilots and say, do you know anyone who's going? And we get replies and we match them together. On the map, on the left of the slide, you will see red lines and blue lines. The red lines are the flights that we have arranged through this team, and the blue lines are shipping routes that we have used again to help donors bring cargo to the destinations. There have been much more than this. These are just the ones we are tracking. These are just the ones that we have organized. There are lots of other movements, mostly in general aviation and also in shipping, that we're not even aware of. So I'm not saying that we're the only ones moving. A lot of people are helping us with this. Let's go to that next slide. Uh, what is a typical load? Well, that single engine Cessna that you saw earlier in the photo, with 6 hours of fuel and two pilots, here's what we can carry. We can carry 500 vials of an antibiotic against pneumonia. We carried 80 bottles on the same flight of another general antibiotic. We had 300 face shields. We had 120 PPE suits in that same airplane. We carried insulin and phenobarbital. There was a patient who was suffering seizures and another patient who had run out of insulin. And we were able to buy this from, or one of our donors was able to buy this from Mercury Drug. The airplane actually waited for it. This same airplane, this same flight carried 50,000 pesos worth of vitamins and other minerals to help people strengthen their immune systems. We had 500 face masks in there. We had 100 gloves. We had two intubation boxes. These are the aerosol boxes that protect doctors and nurses from getting infected when they're doing an intubation procedure. All of that fit into the back of this airplane. You can see that in the photo there. You can see other photos showing up on the ground. Again, we had a Coast Guard team to help us move this cargo from the various donors in Batangas, Cavite, and Makati, all the way to an airfield in Magalang, Pampanga, where a Flying Club airplane flew this cargo to Masbate. It was a 5-hour mission. The pilots came back very tired, but we are extremely heartened by the reactions of the people on the ground. When we flew a similar cargo to Katarman, we had doctors waiting for us there, and they rushed to the airplane. We had to tell them to stay and wait at the ramp because we could not get close to them. The pilots couldn't even use the bathrooms in the terminal, so they had to stay near the airplane. Well, we unloaded everything, and they sanitized all the cargo, and they started picking through them. They shouted their thanks at us, and then immediately left to go back to their hospital because they now had PPEs. They were seeing patients with COVID illnesses without any PPEs. It was almost like a suicide mission. They were very, very grateful for whatever they got. So it's very heartening and it's very fulfilling. Let's go to the next slide. Why is this so noteworthy? Well, there comes a time when you're trying to unblock your supply chain when smaller is better. I'm going to talk about this again in my last slide, which is coming up. Smaller is better because through general aviation, small airplanes, we can fly quick, direct hops directly to small rural airports and airfields. We have flown to Katarman, we have flown to Pinamalayan, we have flown to Tawi-Tawi. We have flown to airports that are not serviced by airlines. And of course, all the airlines are grounded anyway. None of them can fly any passenger flights. There is one airline that is flying one cargo flight every day, but that's extremely full all the time. And so quick direct hops, only small airplanes can get in there. And that's our big advantage. We're also intermodal. We've learned that we can connect seaports with airports, and we can connect airports and donors via land also. The Coast Guard has, as I said earlier, given us two air assets, a twin-engine airplane and a helicopter. And in some cases, we can even cross-dock between airplanes. Let me tell you the story of this. If you see the pilot on the upper left, the woman pilot flying a Coast Guard Islander, uh, her husband is also with the Coast Guard and is stationed in Tawi-Tawi. They had not seen each other since January. Okay, and when we had cargo for Zamboanga and Tawi-Tawi, she quickly volunteered. I'd like to fly this flight. She's a senior officer in the Coast Guard. She's a captain, which is just below flag rank. But she arranged it so that she would fly this airplane, and then she mentioned to the group, to the core team, that her husband was in Tawi-Tawi on a mission to prevent illegal entries into the south of the Philippines. He was there to prevent non-approved entries from other countries who were trying to escape COVID in their countries to the Philippines. And he was without any PPEs, no face masks, no face shields. And so we told the pilot, you know what, we're gonna collect some supplies for your husband. So in addition to the cargo she was carrying, a lot of pilots came together and gave her a lot of face shields and face masks so that she could lend them, she could give them to her husband and her husband's unit. There were so many donations that the plane got overloaded. And on the night before she was going to take off, she realized that the plane was overfull and she could not carry everything. Um, that same night, our core team, got a call from another pilot saying, "Hey, I have a jet airplane. We just landed in Manila and we're leaving for Zamboanga tomorrow. I can carry 650 kilos if you need us." And we said, "Of course we need you." And there lay the solution to the overloaded Coast Guard airplane. And then we asked the jet pilot one last question: where is your airplane parked? And he said, "Well, I'm right here outside the Coast Guard hangar." And he said, "This is an incredible coincidence." So we loaded both airplanes with the cargo. They transferred cargo from the Philippines nationwide airplane to the Philippines vaccine. The both airplanes took off from Zamboanga, dropped it off, and then flew on to Tawi-Tawi. On the right side, you can see that private jet that was able to carry half the load. On the bottom left, you can see the Coast Guard pilot being checked by another Coast Guard officer. That is her husband. Her husband met her on the ramp in Zamboanga and made sure that she didn't get away from the airplane until he took her temperature. his exact words were, "You're 36.7. Is that normal?" And of course, everybody said, "She's been missing you for 3 months. Of course, she's a little excited, right?" And that's the story of that flight. There's another story. You see that fabric roll that's inside that vehicle on the extreme right side of the slide. That fabric roll was donated by a designer who wanted to ship that fabric to friends in Davao, who would then convert that or use that fabric, which is taffeta fabric, to make PPEs. He estimated that that roll of fabric could make 500 PPEs. And he got in touch with us and said, can you put this on your list? And we said, you know what? We don't have a flight to Davao, but we do have an airline cargo flight to General Santos, and we'll ask them, we'll beg them to put this on their airplane, and they did. The airline carried it to General Santos. It landed there. We had a small Cessna airplane, again General Aviation, that was ready to bring it to Davao. And although we had measured and weighed this roll of fabric, and we thought that it would fit into the airplane. They actually couldn't get it through the door. It would fit into the airplane, but it wouldn't fit through the door. The pilot said it was like trying to fit a piano through a porthole. So we had to find another solution, and they did. The owner of that airplane found a truck that was carrying pineapples, that was going to carry pineapples from Pinamolok in Cotabato all the way to Davao. And they asked the truck, "Can you please carry this cargo instead?" When the truck owner and driver understood that this was really urgent for Davao, they said, "You know what? We're not even going to get the pineapples. We'll just bring this to Davao and drive back to get our pineapples later." So the fabric reached Davao in 3 hours. Again, intermodal, air and land. And it didn't make 500 PPEs. It made 700 PPEs, actually 750. So 750 doctors in the destination, in suburbs around Davao, in the rural areas around Davao, are now benefiting from this loan. There are many, many other stories. I wish I could tell them all, but I don't want to use up all of the time. What can we do with this network even after COVID? Is there something we can do? Of course there is. There is a similar network in the United States, and we call them angel flights. What could we do with this? Well, let's say you had an indigent patient who had to get to Manila for cancer treatment. Let's say you had a PWD child who needs to get home from Manila to a province, and they cannot afford the airline ticket. Well, with a network like this, you find out, is anybody going to Masbate, please, or Pinamalayan or Calapan? Uh, we can take a passenger if there's an extra seat, and then they don't have to pay. So humanitarian payloads, quick direct hops, smaller is better. Let me go on to the last slide. Charlie made some terrific points about the future of supply chain, and I'd like to talk about that um, a little bit more, just to build on what he has already said. So there is a Harvard term called volatile VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a VUCA world, and it's about to get even worse. As Charlie said, if we're still thinking about roadblocks and barriers and checkpoints, then we're missing the point, right? There is an article that you can look up at the South China Morning Post. It's been redistributed by Fox News. It's been redistributed by CNN. It's been republished by the Washington Post. You can easily find it. They have identified that there are now 30 strains of this virus. It has mutated many, many times, and they have identified 30 strains. There may be more, okay? And the worst strain is 270 times more lethal than the weakest strain. In other words, the worst strain has 270 times more viral load. And they've identified that the most viral strain is in Europe, is the same strain that's in New York. There are different strains all throughout the United States. There are different strains from Asia. All of these are different from the original strain that was identified in Wuhan. So what am I saying? We're developing vaccines. We may have to do much more than that. Maybe the vaccines need to be different from each other. Maybe there will be a third wave. Maybe there will be a fourth wave. We don't know. This virus is mutating. It's not even harmful to animals anymore. It started in animals, but it's now migrated and mutated to become harmful to humans and only humans. This will be a multi-year disruption. This disruption will take several years. Some industries will take many, many years to recover. The travel industry, the airline industry, all of those are very brutally impacted right now. It is even more important for business owners and enterprises to think about continuity. Business continuity used to be a mission critical thing. You know, supply chains, if they couldn't deliver to the customer, they were failing in their mission. It's no longer just mission critical now. It's enterprise survival. A lot of small and medium scale industries or enterprises will not survive this. They won't. And that's sad because, in fact, the SMEs, the small and medium scale enterprises, are the ones that are the most nimble, the most resilient, and the most diverse companies that can help us be multiple redundant and give us most business continuity. Let me uh, let me give you an example of this. All right, I used to work for an infant nutrition company, so we were very, very aware of food safety and sanitization in the plant. We wore PPEs whenever we entered our factory, even as far back as 10 years ago. I learned to wear a PPE. But because we're in infant nutrition, we learned that we have to be very flexible and agile in case there is an interruption in the food supply, in the milk supply, right? And one of the strategies that we did was this. We identified our most vulnerable plants, factories around the world, and we said, where can we have a supply interruption that could really damage us? And we decided that one or two plants were very vulnerable. So we then said, okay, let's talk to another plant in another country or in another state in the U.S. And we talked to one, and this one was in Wisconsin. I'm going to use that example. Okay, and we told him, look, we want 10,000 metric tons of capacity on call within 48 hours. And they said, you're kidding, right? And we said, no, we're serious. We're going to pay you $2 million a year for you to give us 10,000 metric tons on call. In other words, we're giving you a call option, but we're not trading in commodities, we're trading in capacity. And they said, $2 million. We said, yes. And they said, okay, you're on. 48 hours notice, you'll get 10,000 metric tons. Give me a check for $2 million. And we did. And lo and behold, that same year, we had a business continuity issue, not because of our factory, but because of supply into that factory from our suppliers. And we called up the guy and we said, we need our 10,000 metric tons. And he gave us the 10,000 metric tons. And we were able to produce product that we sold and made operating profit of about 250 million. In other words, the 2 million was nothing, right? Business continuity saved the day. Later, I asked this small factory, how were you able to do it? I'm sure you were also loaded. And he said, well, we took your $2 million and we gave $1 million to another smaller factory. He said, we want a call option. You know, if you give us 5,000 metric tons, we'll pay you $1 million a year. In other words, the call options cascaded down to smaller and smaller smaller and medium scale enterprises or factories that were able to roll up their capacities to give us 10,000 metric tons. You have to think outside the box now. We all have to think outside the box. Business continuity is survival right now. And I guarantee you, knowing what I know, having worked at an infant nutrition company, buying $200 million worth of milk every year, I guarantee you the next world crisis will be on food. It will be on food safety. It will be on clean water. We've now experienced a pandemic. The next one is going to be on the supply of food. And again, you 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 can't you can't farm at a very large scale. Your sources of food will always come from small and medium enterprises. Right? I'm going to end with a quote from Bill Gates, who in 1994, I think, sometime in that time, wrote a book called um, uh, "The Road Ahead." Some of you, those who are 60 years old and above, who are now confined at home, will remember this book, The Road Ahead by Bill Gates. He said, you can go online, you can commercialize online, you can be very powerful and strong online, but at the end of the day, you still have to put product in the hands of the consumer. The one industry that will remain unchanged in the age of the internet, and he said this in 1994, is supply chain. At the end of the day, you need to put your product in the hands of the customer, right? I always used to tell my CEO, my global CEO, when I was a supply chain leader worldwide, I would say you can't sell it unless somebody makes it, right? So you have to support your supply chain. You have to resource your supply chain, just like you resource sales and marketing. You can't sell it unless someone makes it. We can't make it unless we can buy raw materials. And at the end of the day, it's not a sale unless you deliver the product. So you have to get it there. And that's why we have to keep thinking about supply chain, business continuity, and enterprise survival. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tonet. The title was indeed quite intriguing. Now we understand what it all means, and thanks for sharing real life inspiring examples to us and how you applied your passion for flying to help unblock the supply chain. So, on to our final speaker for the day. Our final speaker is the former head of Unity